Hi guys, Budcat7 here. It is December 23rd, 2017, and I wish everybody happy holidays who's celebrating. Peace to everybody. That's my wish for everybody. Do what all the great masters said. Take no thought and forget about everything and enjoy your holiday. Okay, so today we're going to go into part two of debunking mainstream academic history on the stone walls of New England. And today we're going to get into a little logistics and demographics and take a look at that stuff and see what that's all about. But before that, I have to go back to my first video on the subject, and there's a correction I have to make, and there's a couple things I have to say about it. Um, First of all, I should have said and mentioned in the video, last video, really to get a complete understanding of it, you have to understand that mainstream academia says that most of the stone walls were constructed between 1725 and 1825. So that's 100 years in which most of the stone wall building took place. Some academics say that it went a little bit further, 1835, and there's some that say it goes to even the 1870s. Now, before my correction here, just to get a understanding of it properly, okay, you have to understand, nobody is saying here that the colonists and settlers didn't build any of the stone walls. Nobody is saying here that the Indians didn't do the stone work or their ancestors didn't. You have to understand what's being said here. Of course, the colonists and settlers were building some stone walls. And Robert Thorson, and again, not to take anything away from these people like Robert Thorson and the work that they've done in these fields, absolutely, they've gotten some stuff very right. They've done excellent research. But the thing that's the problem here is that the premise is wrong. The premise is that all the stone work was either done by the settlers or colonists or the Indians in, recent centuries or whatever it might be. And that's not entirely correct, in my opinion, okay, from studying this subject, okay? Now, if you read Robert Thorson Stone by Stone, he identifies 4 different types of stone walls, okay? And, clearly, at least 1 or 2 of them, the types that he describes in his books, are very intricately done stonework, which excellent craftsmanship with, flat tops and, flat sides. And anybody who lives in the New England area, and I do, I live in New York, I have relatives in upstate Connecticut, I've traveled extensively throughout New York, I've seen all this stuff. When you see houses that were built in the 1800s and, the few houses that are left from the 1700s that you can find here and there, most of them are rotted or fallen down or burnt down. When you see these houses and the walls that are adjacent to these houses on these properties, they're walls that are built with, excellent craftsmanship. As a matter of fact, I have a book here. This is The Forgotten Art of Building a Stone Wall by Curtis P. Fields. This was edited by the staff of Yankee Magazine, who I've had some dealings with their journal, or one of their journalists there about Thorson. But here's a book from 1971 that shows the art of stonewall building based on this Curtis P. Fields, who studied stonewall building, etc., etc. Every single picture in this book. There's a lot of pictures in this book. If you look at the stonework in this book, all of the stones in the stone walls in this book are flat. completely flat, okay? Every single picture in that book, it's all, and the craftsmanship and the work is amazing, you know? So, you know, Robert Thorson's identified these songs. Naturally, the walls that are built with excellent craftsmanship, those are the ones that are built by the settlers and the colonists with a knowledge of stoneworking and a precision, at least an attempt at precision. And, you know, that went on. Obviously, you know, Kevin Gardner in The Granite Kiss, the book I was showing the last time, you know, his family's been doing it for generations, you know. They're done. And I've seen so many examples of this myself, even, you know, in my videos. I think you can see one in there where it's, you know, on somebody's property there. They're absolutely built with precision. They're perfectly square. Very nice work done, but that doesn't account for all these stone walls like Thorson has here on the cover of his book. This is not one done by the colonists or the settlers. These were the pre-existing walls. So anyway, just that aside, let's get back to this because I want to make this as quick as possible. And look, I got a number wrong. It's not 247 years. It was 243 years, which makes our final number here come out to be still 15,000 men working 648 years without Sundays and without the winter months, 12 hours a day. And as I said, these people could not be building walls all the time. They had other things to do. What about planting time? What about harvest time, holidays, sick days, bad weather days, blah, blah, blah? You know, you could just, you know, think about it. You know, and if you're using their number of 15,000 men and you include all these days that they could not be building stone walls, it's going to approach somewhere near 1,000 years, okay? And, you know, don't get upset. This is not my number. This is not my extrapolation, okay? Barbara Delong, and I'm not the first one to do this. Barbara Delong did it in her film, Secrets of the Stones, with her friend Patrick Cook. They did the extrapolation already based on what was put out. And second, this number of 240,000 miles of stone walls in New England and 15,000 men, etc., that was put out in 1936. You can hear it in Barbara DeLong's video. The government contracted somebody to make sense of the 1872 Department of Agriculture Geological Land Survey. So they were attempting to make sense of it, and this was the number. Nobody got out there with a tape measure and measured 240,000 miles of stone walls. Okay? Barbara DeLong thinks it's an underestimate. She thinks it's closer to like 500,000 miles of stone wall. So what does that do to our numbers here? You know, it's going to make this number really silly, and it's going to say something like 15,000 men work like 2,000 years to build all these stone walls. So, look, you know, as I said, just think about it. I'm giving these corrections. It's only fair. It's 243 years, not 247 years. I'm sorry about that mistake. Okay? And this number of 240,000 miles of stone walls and this extrapolation here of 15,000, you know, this working calculation here, that was given out by, some academic that was contracted by the government to make sense of the data and put something out to make sense of it. You see? But in my opinion, they tried to minimize it, because if you use a realistic study of the data and put it into realistic terms, it doesn't make sense, okay? Supposedly, they're supposed to have built all of these stone walls between 1725 and 1825, okay? And it would have taken 15,000 men working normal time. The time they weren't doing anything else or weren't inside during the winter and all this other stuff. That's the time they had to build the stone walls. It would take a couple of thousand years. It's nonsense, okay? So if you were to impress them with a realistic number, people would say, that's crazy, couldn't be. And that's why you have to get into the history of it. And that's why you have to get into the logistics of it and the demographics and all this other stuff. You have to have a good understanding of the history of this region, etc., etc. Simple as that. Okay? So let's take a look at some of the logistics based on the data from that time, okay? So there were two early census done. The first one was done in 1790, and the second one was done in 1800, okay? 1800 was the second official United States Census, okay? They have numbers on population going back in time now based on records from the Dutch and from the British, you know. So, they have some numbers of past, but not official, okay? So, but they do have some numbers of the amount of people who were in these places at that time. So, we're going to take a look at a breakdown of that. But just to give you an idea of what was going on, what the populations were at those times. And just remember, keep in mind, most of these stone walls were built between the period of 1725 to 1825. So at the time of the first and second census, that would put us at the height of the stone wall building, according to mainstream academia. Okay, so let's get an idea of what the population of New York City, Manhattan, which, remember, formerly New Amsterdam, it was controlled by the Dutch. Remember that. The land between the Connecticut River and the Hudson River was considered to be New Netherland, of which New Amsterdam, Manhattan Island, New York City was a part of that. So it was controlled by the Dutch up until 1665, where they had to resolve a land dispute based on sovereignty. It said, the British were contracted by the Dutch East India Company to go up the Hudson. And, this is where this all comes from. And, there was a land dispute there between the British and the Dutch, and they resolved it in 1665, where they said, and you have to understand stuff about that too, because that's pertinent to this whole thing. It's part of the big picture. See? So let's take a look. This is New York City. This is the population in New York City here at the time of the 1790 census and the census in 1800. So population in New York City was 33,131 in 1790. And in 1800, it was 60,515. Okay, that's official census data taken from United States Census at that time. Okay, so now you have to look at the breakdown of that in order to really understand that. And also I'm going to take from Albany too, because Albany was a major city during that time in New York State, and it's right more or less in the heart of Stonewall country. Most of the stone walls are in New York State, so it's right in the heart of it. It's between a lot of it, close to Dutchess County, where I was close to, living in the woods among the stone walls, getting firsthand 24-hour a day look at the stone walls. I live with bears and coyotes in the woods in order to get, firsthand, look at this stuff so I can look at it myself and make of it whatever it is that I can make of it. So see my first two videos on the site in upstate Connecticut if you haven't seen them. On the site that I was at, and we'll talk more about that later, but let's get to this over here. So we're going to look at the census data for Albany. This is the first federal census in 1790, Albany census here. We'll also look at it over here. Shoot, damn it. So, in any case, the population of Albany at that time was, let's see what it says here. Uh, 573 heads of families on an average household size of 6.1 people by ward. The city population was distributed 1,612 people in the first ward, 878 in the second ward, and 1,004 in the third ward. Included in those totals were 572 slaves. 1790, okay, for Albany. So what are we talking about? A couple of thousand people there, maybe. Okay, so let's look a little bit more at the type of demographics associated with this stuff. Okay, so you can take a look at this. Let me see here. Oh, all right. Let's see. All right. This is the data broken down. It says here no microdata from the 1800 population census available, but aggregate data for small areas together with compatible cartographic boundary files can be downloaded from National Historic Geographic Information System. So you see, there's even a deficit in really true information in here too, unless you really look at it under a microscope. And this is for all the states at that time. And we're just going to talk about New York here, in Dutchess, in Ulster, in Orange County, where I was in New York State. That would be right around this area. And I was here in Connecticut in the woods at that site at Mallory over there, looking at the stone walls. So we're going to take a look at that. Okay, so I mean, this is one of the arguments that people get. Oh, there's plenty of people back then. There was enough people to build all the stone walls. You don't know what you're talking about. Blah blah blah. Okay, so let's take a look at the logistics here a little bit and some of the data from that time. So we're going to look at Dutchess County over here. So the first category here